Welcome back to the Feminine Leadership Summit. I'm really excited to introduce you to beautiful Allie McFee. Allie is a women's health educator, a hormone balancing chef, red tent facilitator, a tantrika, and the owner of the hormonal health cooking blog, Modern Goddess Lifestyle. She helps women balance their hormones and radically love their bodies and sexuality with nutritious recipes, exquisite self-care, and womb-clearing rituals in her online programs, cooking classes, and one-on-one coaching. She is in the process of birthing a cookbook on women's hormone health. And for more information, recipes, and online classes, you can visit her at Modern Goddess Lifestyle and follow her on Instagram and Facebook at Modern Goddess Lifestyle. Welcome, Allie.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Lily. I love you. And hello, everybody listening to this call.
Love you too. Such a pleasure. So for anybody that's just getting to meet you now, will you share a little bit more about your own kind of personal journey of how you got to be doing what you're doing now?
Absolutely. So my personal journey, it started off when I was still on the birth control contraceptive. I had been taking it for 5 years, and I was reading a book called The Red Tent, which I highly recommend. It's by Anita Diamant. And this book talks about the generation of people living in agricultural, tribal, biblical times. It's based off of the Bible. It gives voices to the women that were in the Bible that we may not have heard their stories about what their life was like at that time. And in this book, because they were living so close to nature, they were in connection with the moon cycle. And when it would become the new moon, all the women would bleed together and go into what was known as the red tent. And they would bleed on the hay, free bleed, share stories, massage each other. This is how they passed down their lineage and their the information about herbalism and different ways to care for their body through these cycles of womanhood, whether it was in pregnancy or childbearing years, or herbs for the menstruation as well as moon pause. And reading this book was the first time that I literally felt my womb pulse. I never felt that before. It was this like movement down here in my sacral chakra, and I realized that I was not attuned to this cyclical rhythm of the moon. I didn't even know where I was at in my cycle. And later I found out that on the birth control contraceptive, or anytime we're taking a birth control that has hormones in it, synthetic hormones, it's actually blocking our body's ability to ovulate. It's blocking that whole process. It's suppressing ovulation. So we don't have that cyclical rhythm. We're always in this pre-ovulatory state of our body. We never go through what is known as the luteal phase, where our body is building progesterone levels and it's changing how we're feeling emotionally and mentally and physically. And so as I learned about this, I felt really disconnected to this sense of fluctuation, this rhythmic, cyclical energy of femininity. And I wanted to reclaim that. So I got off the birth control contraceptive. I didn't have a flow for 2 whole years. And then when it finally came back, I was opening a raw food, vegan, gluten-free, dairy-free restaurant, and as head chef. So I was working like 80 hours a week on my feet every day. It was very high intensity of workflow production, opening a restaurant. And during this time period, I got back my bleed. She came, and it was so exciting. However, she came back 2 weeks every single month. And I would experience this intense like week of brown blood, sometimes even like gray black blood, very old blood, and stagnancy, poor circulation. Low progesterone levels is what I was experiencing. And it would cause me to feel so exhausted. And it would also cause me, because I was tired, to eat a lot of plant-based sugar, even though it was healthy. Like vegetarian sugar coming from natural sources, I was still using that to give me energy, and that affected my hormones even worse. And then when my red flow would come, I would be on that for about another week, and it would be super heavy. And again, this was just exhausting. And so what I feel like many people who bleed, women who bleed, experience is that if they have any issues with their hormones, and that was my story, is that when we go to the doctor, the OBGYN will again try to prescribe us the birth control contraceptive to regulate things. Or in my case, I was prescribed synthetic hormones, progesterone in particular, because I had high estrogen dominance, low progesterone, and high cortisol levels, the stress hormone. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to see how I could help to balance my body naturally. And then that's what took me down the wormhole of eating for my menstrual cycle, balancing my hormones naturally with nutrition, as well as diving into the mysteries of the womb, the cycles of death and rebirth, and feeling seen, understanding the priestess wounds that come up when we're working with our creative energy and we're offering it to the world, like the blocks, the emotional blocks that come up, and how to really deep dive into my menstrual cycle as a blueprint, so that felt like my foundation, that I could work with that as my creative energy was rising, and as I was creating these gifts in the world, as well as how to eat for my body to feel sustainability, so that I'm not just going and feeling like I'm drying up in life. So as I further dove into this path, and then recognizing how many others had the same story and there wasn't like a holistic solution, that's when I became a certified women's health and nutrition coach and started working on this cookbook for women's hormone balance and helping sisters really tune into their wombs and their cycles to support their body, rather than like becoming distracted and overwhelmed by all the clutter out here that's like, do this, do that, take this drug, or there's so much going on out here. And I really believe when we tune inward and we listen to the cycles and the changes and those intuitive nudges, and then we support our body with great nutrition and herbs, that's how we can be our own medicine women, and that we can be our own inner healers.
Thank you. So powerful. It's so powerful for women to hear other women's stories, especially around our bodies and our menstruation. It's something, that is not really talked about out there. So thank you for being a voice and an advocate for that.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I have my own version of being on the pill, coming off it, not having my period for years. And then it was just super irregular. Like yours came full on for 2 weeks. Mine was just very, very irregular. And it wasn't until I started actually going on full moon hikes and sitting in women's circles and all of that, and connecting with my womb, that it just started coming every full moon for me. Some women it comes on the full moon, some on the new moon, or the in-between stages, right?
Yeah. We can talk about that too.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Okay. Yeah, I love this. And I want to highlight something that you said that before we go into talking about the moon, because that's a juicy topic too. Is that when your cycle normalized, you were in these women's circles and connecting to the moon. I feel like the way that our modern day society has been created is that we're kind of all isolated in these little houses that are so beautiful that we get to create. But back when we lived in these tribal communities, we were together. And if there was a threat, like if a lion came to camp, we wouldn't just disperse and run away and fend for ourselves. We came together because we needed to protect the babies. We couldn't just abandon our community. So I really believe when we come together, we feel that support that we have within our ancestral coding. Like, this is what we did. This is what we've been doing for millennia. And so when we come together and we share this support structure, and we feel vulnerable, and we can hear each other through the sharing and sisterhood circles, as well as attuning to the macrocosm, a greater rhythm of the lunar cycle, that our bodies can certainly heal and come back into balance. And yeah, my cycles 3 to 5 days now, and I just love it. Like, I don't feel pain. I slow down, and that's when I have my biggest like epiphanies, like, aha, like this is what I've been trying to figure out. Like, I love it.
Yeah. Yeah, I second that. Like, and I had so much pain, so many cramping, like really uncomfortable, and there's just absolutely nothing now. And it's like the time to truly go within and listen to that deeper wisdom, and get out of the mind and truly come into the wisdom of the body.
I love it. So, shall we talk about the moon phases?
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Okay. Yeah, so the first thing I want to share is that where you're at in your cycle, if you're not bleeding on the new moon or the full moon, don't shame yourself. Like, don't think that there's something wrong with you. I see this like oftentimes in our communities or on Instagram, it'll be like, I'm a full moon bleeder, I'm a new moon bleeder. And then other sisters will be like, well, I'm not. And don't shame yourself. I've come to see this in another perspective, which has a lot to do with our creative energy, whether it's being inwardly focused or externally focused. And also there is the real experience that there is light pollution too. So if you're one who does work crazy hours at night, or you're on your computer at night, and that glow from the computer is essentially mimicking the full moon. Like back in the day, we only had fire, starlight, moonlight, and the moon changed. And so, if we are on our computers till 2 a.m. every night and then going to bed right afterwards, it can impact our melatonin production, which is the sleep hormone. It can cause insomnia. It can impact the other hormones as well, the thyroid. So there is that, clear understanding that in modern day society, we do have light pollution. So if you feel like your hormones are not balanced and the light's affecting it, that is something to be aware of. But also going deeper into this creative flow, our internal creative energy. So what I've learned is that the new moon energy is, it's the dark moon. Like, you can't see much when you go outside. And so with our internal energy of our creative energy, which is our fertile energy, our sexual energy, it's all interconnected. Oftentimes sisters who are bleeding on the new moon, their internal creative energy is focused inward. And it could be a healing experience we're having. Perhaps we're fasting or doing a lot of womb clearing, the mother line, ancestral clearing, or even preparing to birth a baby or to, conceive. All of these are experiences of our energy being turned inward and really focusing that creative energy on healing and cultivating and preparing to conceive. And so when we are full moon bleeders, this is kind of the opposite. We're bleeding on the full moon and we're ovulating on the new moon. Oftentimes it's said that our energy, this creative energy, is being cultivated and utilized externally, that we are not getting ready to conceive and birth something in, that we are birthing something for the global perspective. And we're holding space for the new moon bleeders who are doing that internal ancestral clearing kind of like healing work that's at that time. So oftentimes this creative energy may be being focused on building a business or launching a summit or doing something that's very like giving to the collective. And I found that there's neither right or wrong way, like what moon phase to bleed on. I have found that due to what I'm going through with my creative energy, that my flow will change. When I went through this whole experience of doing a 2-week cleanse, and I was fasting, and I was really looking at childhood patterning that I was still playing out in my life, my cycle completely shifted from the full moon into the new moon, and now I'm bleeding with a new moon now. So it can change. And depending on what sister who is in our life that maybe we're living with or collaborating with, our wombs can sync up and we can bleed with those others in our life. I've had this happen multiple times. The retreat that you and I met in Kauai, the Sisterhood of the Rose, my womb synced up with Shona's womb, and together we bled for 4 months because we were working on birthing this thing for the collective, and we're harmonizing with each other's creative energy. So our wombs can fluctuate, and then also if we're bleeding on the waxing or the waning the moons, which the waxing is the midpoint between the new moon and the full moon, and the waning is the midpoint between the full moon and the new moon. So if we're bleeding on the waxing moon, this is how I like to see our creative expression at this time, is that just like the new moon, when the creative energy is turning inward and we're kind of cultivating healing, that's the same for the waxing moon. The energy is still kind of turned inward, but we're starting to grow that energy, and it's starting to build into something big that we're offering. We're building momentum. And when we're bleeding on the waning moon, this is the time where we're starting to ground and contract and go into the dark moon. So oftentimes I see when me or other sisters are bleeding on the waning moon, it's like our energy is still extended outward, helping, this collective experience. But we are starting to kind of turn inward and ground and taking stock of our harvests and really grounding, contracting our energy so that we can hold that space of that birthing. We can hold it in a very grounded way. So I see our cycle shifting, and it's so interesting how this all flows. And so I just want to say, like, wherever you're at, like, it doesn't matter if you're a new moon bleeder or full moon bleeder, you're divinely perfect where you're at. And it may change with your creative energy. It may change with who's present in your life, who you're collaborating with. It's all just one big juicy flow.
I love that. Yeah, it's I definitely don't feel like, one is wrong or right, but I've noticed like my own, like, when I'm on the full moon and my energy's out, and that's amazing and that's great, but I want to be a mama, and so there's a part of me, I'm like, oh, I want to go in, I want to do the conceiving, but it's all so perfect. So yeah, and it's such a beautiful map to use, and to really just kind of like see where your energy is.
Absolutely. It's such a beautiful map. It is our blueprint. And when we understand how to work with our blueprint rather than being in the dark, because they didn't teach me this when I was growing up in high school. They taught us about the birds and the bees and sexuality in kind of a really interesting way, but they didn't teach us about how our hormones fluctuate. And with this being, the topic of feminine leadership, this whole summit, I feel that the more that we understand our menstrual cycle as our blueprint and know how our hormones are going to fluctuate from week to week to week, and being able to work with our bodies, support ourselves with certain foods and herbs, know when we're going to, need space to experience this emotional processing and recycle energy and space to kind of decompress and let go so that we can have these epiphanies just pop through, and times that we can communicate and that we can feel very expressive. Knowing how our cycle impacts all of this is, I feel, where our strength comes from. And I feel true leadership comes from knowing ourselves and trusting our intuition, and showing up in the world without a mask. We have this society that, like, we're in these certain roles and there's certain expectations we put on ourselves or feel like others want from us, and then we put on a mask and we don't show up as the authentic us. Yeah. And so I feel the more that we tune inward, know our cycles and how we're going to be showing up each week differently, and really honoring our bodies instead of trying to be something that we're not. Like when we're in our late luteal phase, which is after ovulation, it's pre-menstrual phase, our please make space time of the month, putting on a mask, I feel like looks like taking Midol and drinking tons of espresso so we can keep pushing through. And there's other ways to support our body at that time. There's mineral rich foods that can build energy internally. And maybe we can't be like going and pushing with our schedules at that time, but we can still get a lot done from a very grounded, rooted space if we're working with our bodies. And so I feel like that's where the leadership comes from, is living in harmony with our cycles and being authentic in every moment and caring for our body and being able to communicate to others from that space by loving ourselves and listening to ourselves and working with our flow.
Totally. Whenever I'm starting to go into my luteal, getting closer to bleeding, I notice, my maybe a little bit more edgy or grumpy or, or like really wanting to like wind down and wrap up my kind of projects so I can really go inward. And for me to recognize that and know where I'm actually at in my cycle, then I can communicate that. I let my partner know this is what's going on with me right now. So yeah, it's
absolutely powerful. So powerful.
Well, my last question is, why now? Why are we being called into our feminine leadership? Why is it so important for us as women to understand and get to know our cycles, our body, listen to them, care for them? Why now?
Absolutely. This is such a powerful question because I feel that we have been running on overdrive and pushing ourselves for quite some time. I do feel that the birth control contraceptive at a period of time in our life helped us step up and offer our dharma in the work world. But what happened was, this patriarchal society, the patriarch runs on solar energy, the matriarch runs on lunar energy. And so as we found ways to have, prevent pregnancy and be able to show up more in the world, in the workforce, the work world had already been built off of this solar energy from 9 to 5 every day in this linear based structure. And so as women came into these roles and were excelling at them, also we weren't able to fully work with this structure in harmony with our own cyclical energy and the other things that we're committed to, such as having children and being able to work with a schedule that's more nurturing and more in harmony with a flow. And so over time, in order to keep up, like I had mentioned earlier, taking Midol and taking shots of espresso to just pump through the day and get things done, we're all desiring a new format, a new way of showing up with our dharma, with our gifts from an overflowing cup, where we can be in these roles for our community, be in these roles with our work, offer our creative gifts to the world, yet not deplete ourselves, not jeopardize our health. Because what we're seeing is higher infertility rates and, wonky menstrual cycles where we're bleeding for 2 weeks every single month, or bleeding like different times throughout the month, or painful period cramps, thyroid imbalances. We're seeing all of these issues. And so I feel that now more than ever, this energy of feminine leadership is coming to the surface as the divine feminine has risen. And we're finding ways to be in the flow with our life and create a lifestyle that is in harmony with honoring our body's energy and not depleting ourselves. And this, we can look at this in the macrocosm. We're looking at ways to create more sustainability with Earth so that we're not just producing, but how to really take care of the topsoils and her minerals so that we can create sustainability and for the long term. And so with the menstrual cycle, I would like to give a few tangible tips of what people can do to care for their bodies.
Please.
Yeah. So I keep talking about the menstrual cycle. I have a lot of articles at moderngoddesslifestyle.com that talks about how the hormones fluctuate, because we get kind of into science with that. So I'm just going to give a short overview now, just so you can kind of have a blueprint. But when you bleed, if you're tracking your cycle, that's day 1 of your menstrual cycle is when you start to bleed. And at this time, all of our hormones return to a low level. The right and the left hemispheres of the brain sync up. So if we're slowing down and just letting ourselves release, we're not only releasing the uterine lining, but also emotions. We are clearing things from our womb, old patterns that aren't serving us, and creating space so we can have these epiphanies, these new seeds of ideas download and incubate into our consciousness. And then naturally from that space, as we go into the next phase, which is our follicular phase, our inner spring, our estrogen levels start to rise. And this gives us a lot of new creative energy, fire, like let's take initiative, let's grow these ideas that we just received. And then estrogen rises high enough, and so does testosterone. So we're in our ovulation phase, midpoint of our cycle. So around day 14, most women ovulate. And day 1, of course, is our day that we start to bleed. In ovulation, our energy is most expanded. We're getting things done. We're very task oriented because we have testosterone. So we're just getting stuff done, as well as we're very like flirtatious and communicative, expressive, because that's what high estrogen does. And then we start to contract. We go into our luteal phase, which is the longest phase of our cycle. It lasts 10 to 14 days up until we bleed. And in the beginning, we still may have some high estrogen, testosterone, but we start to have that decline. And then progesterone levels are going to rise. And progesterone levels are what we don't see when we're taking the pill. The pill provides progestin, which is a synthetic version of progesterone, but some studies are showing that progestin is actually converting into estrogen, and it's not really causing progesterone levels in our body. So a lot of us become deficient in progesterone levels when we get off the pill because we never go through this luteal phase where our body makes that progesterone. And when we have low progesterone, we feel anxiety, we feel moody, we have crazy food cravings, we might get a lot of cramping, early bleeding, like that brown spotting. But when we have high progesterone levels, normal progesterone levels at this phase, it helps our energy naturally start to ground and contract, which is what the luteal phase is about. It relates to autumn. And it's time to nest and get organized. So I always notice when I'm like playing and expressive and communicative in my ovulatory phase, now I'm like taking all my papers and getting things on my calendar and like organizing my whole space. And then we prepare to bleed, and then all the hormones drop again. And so when we know how our hormones are fluctuating like this, we can really step into our creatrix energy by planning our schedules according to our menstrual flow. You know, if we're taking on new activities and we're in our ovulatory phase and we feel super energized and excited and let's go, couple weeks later, when we go into our bleed and we have all this stuff planned out, we're going to feel really frustrated that we didn't create that space so that we could go through that emotional process of release that's about to happen when we bleed. So we can know where we're at in our cycle and know that I'm going to have a lot of energy in my ovulatory phase. I'm also going to feel a lot of energy in my follicular phase, my pre-ovulation. So I'm going to plan out a lot of my writing, my communication. I'm going to plan out stuff around that time that involves like building energy and speaking engagements. And then also, knowing this as well to communicate to our beloveds, like a lot of challenges can come up in relationships right before the menstrual cycle comes, and feeling like we need support and we're not being heard, or we need space, and being able to share with our beloveds how our menstrual cycle operates and flows, and so that they can work with us. I feel like one of the most powerful things for me has been when I've actually been able to invite my beloved into my please make space phase, my PMS phase right before I bleed. And together we work with like this contracting, releasing energy that's like, what are we both letting go? What do we both want to shed with this uterine lining about to shed? And so working in ritual, working with the cycles, like planning out the schedule with work or in relationships, harmonizing with the menstrual cycle is so powerful. As well as, when we're bleeding, drinking herbal teas like nettle, so full of minerals. Remember when I was talking about drinking espresso? Like if we instead ask ourselves, like, how can we support our body so that we build energy inward, and instead of having to like force ourselves to show up in the world with like energy that's being borrowed from caffeine. Nettle tea is a great one. Eating seaweeds, sprinkling dulse on top of our salads, eating sushi with nori, eating foods that build the blood like beets and burdock, or if you do eat animal protein, eating organ meat. The liver is actually really full of B vitamins and healthy fats. And so again, it's just all like learning how to build this cup internally of overflowing water, overflowing juiciness, so that comes out into our life, and that we live life from that space so we can show up even further in all the roles that we're committed to, whether we're a business owner or a mother or an employee or community member. Whatever we're doing, we want to feel that juiciness of overflow rather than this depletion. And I really feel like the menstrual cycle is a blueprint for that.
Thank you, Mama. Thank you for giving all of that.
Yeah.
I love, I love the invitation to invite your partner or whoever is kind of around you in your life at that phase of luteal and going into menstruation, of like, what do we want to let go of together? Giving them that opportunity and creating some ritual around it would be really, really powerful. Because I think men have these internal rhythms as well. It's not just as kind of prominent as we do, but it's a really beautiful way for them to be included.
Totally. And, you know, back when we were in tribal times, like men would go into the sweat lodges. Mm-hmm. That's literally like the womb, and with the elements and the sweating and the singing and the praying, that was their form of transmuting this energy. And in our modern day society, we don't have a lot of spaces like that for men to come and be vulnerable and let go. And so inviting your beloved into your menstrual cycle rhythms can be a way that together you feel seen and can be in that vulnerability.
Beautiful. And I, as you were talking, I was like, about the food, I was having this remembrance of the juicy, like, smoothie bowls that you were making on the retreat. Yeah. Yum.
Yum. Yeah. Food should be pleasurable, right? Just because we're eating like gluten-free or dairy-free doesn't mean that we can't have pleasure and beauty from our food.
So pleasurable. So good. And it feels so good to eat that healthy. Well, thank you, sister. I really appreciate your wisdom and your own kind of like embodiment, the depths that you've gone with carrying these codes. Thank you.
Likewise, mirror reflection. I'm just such in awe of your ability to hold space and just bring the depth of vulnerability that we are seeking as a collective right now into these modern ways. So thank you, Lily Claire Love. I adore you and honor you so much.
Thank you, sister. I adore you too. And we adore you.
Yeah, I love you.
And I know that you have a gift also to share.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a womb clearing manual that's available at moderngoddesslifestyle.com or on my Instagram.
We'll have it here.
Oh, great. Yeah. Beautiful. And that just takes you into your womb journey. You know, if you're feeling a lot of intensity of, built up of emotions and you're having difficulty connecting to your inner truth versus like everyone else's truth, and we go into this like people-pleasing experience because it's hard, this manual is a navigation tool to really dive deep into your womb journey and reclaim that sovereignty and feel that this energy is recycling so that we can show up more in the world in our vibrant self, and being clear with what our yeses and our nos are, and not overcommitting and
Yay. Thank you so much for that gift.
Absolutely.
Well, I would love to hear from you. We would love to hear from you, what comes up for you listening to this transmission, and just invite you deeper into like even just putting your hands on your womb in this moment and taking a couple of deep breaths. Just allowing whatever is there. And she really does have a lot of gifts to give you. So take Allie up on her free gift. It would be a really powerful resource for you, and stay connected. We'll see you tomorrow.
Love you.